Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 2, and we're going to talk about Evelyn Underhill. Um, sorry for taking so long to get these videos up, but I have been really sick. So, getting better though. So I am here, and we're going to talk about Evelyn Underhill. And I think she's just this fascinating person, and her interest in the mystics was originally more academic, as you will see, but it moved into a spiritual place for her. And I think that she herself ended up, being in the camp of the mystics as a mystic. However, it was a long journey to get to that process. Some of us, become mystics just like Paul on the road to Damascus, where he encounters Christ, and it's this dramatic conversion moment. Others, more like Evelyn Underhill, through study and prayer and application and pursuit of the scriptures, and it comes to them more more gradually. So let's take a look at what Evelyn Underhill had to say. I'm starting with the PowerPoint that begins with the slide that says, "Who are the mystics?" And so if you take a look at that PowerPoint, we'll move forward through the early life of Evelyn Underhill, and then I'll do another lecture for later. Sorry again, the PowerPoints, I have to keep breaking them up because Moodle won't let me upload them in their entirety, which is kind of a bummer because I'm having to redo a lot of stuff. So, but anyway, I hope that it's all helpful and making sense to you. And yes, you just did see a dog's head. He's not happy with me. He wants to go for a walk. Anyway, okay. Evelyn Underhill had to say that the mystics are the pioneers of the spiritual world, and we have no right to deny validity to their discoveries merely because we lack the courage, the opportunity, or the courage necessary to those who would prosecute such explorations for themselves. So in other words, she began studying the mystics, and she was fascinated by this idea that you could encounter God directly, and that these people actually applied themselves to do this. And she, being a very open-minded person, said, maybe I haven't had this experience. However, who am I to sit in judgment or to say, I don't believe that this actually could happen? Instead, I'm going to keep an open mind, but I'm also going to say, these people really had either opportunity or pure courage to go after this. And who am I to cast aspersions or to say yes or no or yay or nay, just because it's not my experience. So I think Evelyn Underhill is really a lovely, Protestant person from whom we can learn a lot about a possible approach that the church could have toward mysticism in this day and age. So another thing that she says under the title Understanding Mysticism, and again you can toggle back and forth between these slides and the lectures, she says, so remote are these matters from our ordinary habits of thought that their investigation entails a definite preparation, a purging of the intellect. We must, come to this encounter with minds clear of prejudice and convention. We must deliberately break with our inveterate habit of taking the visible world for granted, our lazy assumption that science is real and metaphysics is not. So I love the fact that she says it's a lazy assumption. we think we're so enlightened, we're 21st century people, and we rely on science to know what we know. And I'm not suggesting that that's a bad thing. Far from it. I am all in favor of science. However, I also believe that there are some things that are beyond the ability of science to understand at this point in time. And I think that there are spiritual matters that science just can't discern. And it's just beyond our knowledge at this point in time. And we shouldn't just dismiss things that are more metaphysical simply because we can't prove them with science. So again, Evelyn Underhill leading the way here in our understanding of, how we can understand mysticism, how we can understand this idea of having a direct encounter with God. So who was Evelyn Underhill? She was one of the most widely read writers on spirituality and mysticism. She wrote 39 books and 350 articles and reviews. She was very influential in the Church of England. Therefore, she was an Anglican. Therefore, she's Protestant. So we're studying her. She paved the way for a greater participation of women in the church. She led retreats across England and delivered radio addresses. Her feast day in the Episcopal Church is June 15th. So she was hugely, hugely influential in the Anglican or Episcopal Church. She was born in Wolverhampton in 1875. So she's one of these, kind of end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century people. And then she moved to London in the early 1880s. And so she was born in the Victorian era and lived during the Edwardian era. Victorian era is 1837 to 1901. She lived in the Edwardian era, 1901 to 1914, right, when King Edward was on the throne. It's the age of men, if you remember your Mary Poppins. In 1870, Parliament passed the Married Women's Property Act, which for the first time actually allowed married women to own property. So that was a unique development in women's rights. And only at the end of World War I in 1918 did certain English women, not all English women, get the right to vote. And similarly, the United States lagged behind. Underhill's early life, she was born to Arthur and Lucy Underhill. Her father was a barrister, so an attorney. So she lived this, pretty upper middle class life. You see that with a lot of the scholars of mysticism, particularly in the 19th century, 20th century, 21st century, women, because, or 19th and 20th century, early 20th century, because otherwise you wouldn't have the education, you wouldn't have the leisure time to be able to pursue this type of study. And because there ain't a whole lot of money in mysticism, let me tell you. And so as a result, Underhill is typical of some of the other women that we're going to be talking about in terms of someone who came from money and therefore had the ability or opportunity to study something like mysticism. She was educated at home, homeschooled until she was 13, and she slowly began to show academic promise. Now, one of the huge things that her family did as a family favorite pastime was sailing, and you'll see that this plays a significant role in her life later when she chooses a husband, because she happens to choose a family friend who's a sailor. Now, her formal education took place at Sandgate School, so there she kind of went into more of a high school situation, and she was a confirmed Anglican. She was confirmed at the age of 16, And then she did enter King's College for Women in London for 1 year when she was 23. She studied languages, history, botany, and art history. So she had a broad educational background. But probably what was more formative for her was from the years 1898 to 1913. She was able to travel with her mother widely. And so she took 16 trips throughout Europe during this time, and she fell in love with the art and architecture of the Christian Middle Ages. So this was something that really captivated her. And she also became fascinated with the links between the realms of the matter and spirit. So, and this eventually led to her curiosity about faith. But she, was fascinated with the cathedrals and all of the things that she saw. And when she does eventually become a believer, she says, "The day I came away a good deal shaken but unconvinced, I was converted quite suddenly, once and for all, by an overpowering vision which had no really specific Christian elements, but yet convinced me that the Catholic religion was true. It was so tightly bound up with Catholicism that I had no doubt that that church was my ultimate home." Now, Underhill did attempt to convert to Catholicism, but kind of the circumstances of the 20th century prevented her ultimate conversion. In the meantime, after a long engagement, she marries Herbert Stuart Moore at the age of 32. This was, as I said, her childhood friend who happened to be a sailor. He was, excuse me, he was Anglican, but only nominally so. He was not really a church goer. He was absolutely opposed to Catholicism, so that might have affected Underhill's ability to convert to Catholicism. He was also, like her father, a barrister and a legal writer, and they had a very conventional marriage. Now, what prevented her from converting to Catholicism? She kept putting off her conversion. She was interested in converting, but she decided ultimately that she could not convert. There was a papal decree against modernism that was issued, and Catholicism was declared incompatible with critical modern thought. And Evelyn Underhill was a modernist. She was absolutely involved in thinking. She was pro-science, but she was also kind of caught up in that modernist inquiry of what does it mean to be an individual in the world at this point in time. And so it was something that once that papal decree was issued, she's like, no, I can't go there. I cannot become a Catholic, even though from a mystical point of view, I think she felt that Catholicism was more compatible with her deep faith beliefs. But she remained a Protestant then for the rest of her life. She became famous in England. I mean, she became notable. She was awarded degrees. She was invited to speak at academic institutions. She delivered radio addresses. She became a beloved spiritual director, and she led retreats all across England. She was awarded honorary degrees from King's College, England. In 1913, she received the Fellow of King's College degree in 1927, and she received an honorary doctorate of divinity from the University of Aberdeen in 1939, which is pretty impressive for a woman to receive those kinds of degrees in that time period. Now, during World War I, Underhill lived through both World War I and World War II. So, and her thinking was often shaped by the wars. During World War I, she worked as a translator at the Admiralty in the Naval Intelligence Department. You know, she was a very, very bright woman, and she had studied languages, so she was able to help the British government in terms of doing translating. And then in World War II, she had become a Christian pacifist and had joined the Anglican Pacifist Fellowship. So she did not work under World War II. She also died pretty early on in World War II because she died in 1941. She became ill after keeping a constant and draining work schedule, which is not unlike many other mystics. For instance, Teresa of Avila died fairly young after keeping a constant work schedule where she was constantly traveling across Spain, building new and more monasteries for her order. So, if you are laboring under this thought that these mystics, well, all they do is sit around and pray and read and maybe do a little writing, and otherwise they're very introspective and internal, and they don't go out into the world. I would argue, take Evelyn Underhill as an example, take Teresa of Avila. I can give you a whole list of many, many other mystics who were out in the world and fighting and teaching and instructing and changing the world. So this idea that activism and mysticism don't go together is absolutely incorrect. I want to debunk that. If you finish this class with any one thought in your head, you'll understand that thought, that activism and mysticism, are incompatible, is an absolutely false thought. So I see I'm reaching my 20-minute mark, but not quite yet, so I'll keep going. I believe I've switched over now into the next set of PowerPoints, so you should switch to the next set of PowerPoints. Was Underhill a mystic? So some scholars do classify Underhill as a mystic, others say no. I would say yes. Her overpowering vision of Catholicism certainly suggested, this overpowering vision that she had. You'll see that vision is something that is unique to the mystics. Mystics tend to see things that the rest of us don't necessarily see. So Underhill did receive a vision that suggests that she was a mystic. She says in childhood she had experiences of a quiet, peaceful reality, like the still desert of the mystic, in which there was no multiplicity nor need of explanations. And it's possible that that was a formative influence on her. And so she also had adult experiences that suggested that she was a mystic. So, for instance, she says, I still remember walking down the Notting Hill main road and observing the extremely sordid landscape with joy and astonishment. I don't think Notting Hill back in the day was quite like the movie that we have now. Even the movement of the traffic had something universal and sublime in it. But of course that doesn't last. But the after flavor of it does, and now and then one catches it again. So she's talking about how there was this moment where she could look at this very ordinary landscape and see something universal and sublime in it. Reminds me of Thomas Merton's experience at the corner of 4th and Walnut in Louisville, where he has this moment where he looks at everyone in the traffic and in the ordinary city streets in that intersection, and he's like, I love all these people. I see God in all these people. And so that's definitely a mystical moment. Merton pointed to it as a mystical moment, and I would argue that Underhill's experience here was also a mystical moment. With that, I'm going to sign off and post another lecture, another short lecture on Evelyn Underhill and her thought and her book on mysticism. Carry on.